Tonight, why Justin Trudeau's daycare follies could put Canada into permanent deficit, that and other Liberal shenanigans with the budget. It's February 24th. I'm Brian Lilley, and this is the Ezra Levant Show.
Why should others go to jail when you're the biggest carbon consumer I know?
There's 8,500 customers here, and you won't give them an answer.
You come here once a year with a sign, and you feel morally superior.
The only thing I have to say to the government about why I publish it is because it's my bloody right to do so.
We've been hearing a lot from the Liberals over the past few days, actually the past few months, about how they're going to be making the investments that Canada needs to get the economy going again. My worry is these are the investments Canada doesn't need to build a structural deficit. But let me explain. As he gave his budget update earlier in the week, Finance Minister Bill Morneau was in Vanier, a neighborhood just in the east end of Ottawa, explaining that the economy's slowing down. We need investments. He's not calling this new spending, but investments.
What we're saying to Canadians is that in the face of an economic scenario where we've been having low growth for the last decade and are facing challenging growth, the right approach is to make investments in the economy.
Morneau was selling that same message when he appeared before the House of Commons Finance Committee.
Canadians chose a new path to economic growth. They chose investment.
Now, investments sound good. So does the word infrastructure. Canadians are used to governments building infrastructure. The roads, the bridges, the rail lines, pipelines, all of these things that keep goods and services moving, that keep us moving, that keep us traveling across the country. But I want to take you back to the election campaign when Justin Trudeau announced his infrastructure plan, the one that he linked to the small $10 billion a year budget deficit, the budget deficit that's now $18.4 billion before he adds in new spending. Trudeau didn't just talk about regular infrastructure, the term we've all come to know and many people love. He was talking about a lot more than that, including social infrastructure, green infrastructure.
We need to invest in social infrastructure, in things like affordable housing and childcare. Our communities cannot grow without them. Those same communities cannot be expected to shoulder the costs alone, and a responsible federal partner should never expect them to.
It's these new terms, these add-ons, that have me worried about the future of Canada's budgets. I warned about this during the election. Very few people picked up on it. Very few in the media bothered to report that there was something other than regular old infrastructure. Canadians were sold a bill of goods because the media failed to do their job. There was myself, and I believe Andrew Coyne wrote a column about this in the National Post, but there wasn't much else explaining what this social infrastructure or green infrastructure was all about. I'm still not sure what they mean by green infrastructure other than, well, Gerald Butts, the principal advisor to the Prime Minister, he was the man behind the Green Energy Plan in Ontario. That has me worried. He's the man that wanted a zero carbon economy for Canada. So who knows where that will go and what kind of damage it will do. But when I talk about social infrastructure, I think it's pretty clear. They said very clearly they mean programs for seniors and things like childcare. Well, Jean-Yves Duclos is the minister in charge of things like childcare, and he's already said he's working towards a national daycare program. Let me take you back to earlier this month. Duclos was in Edmonton meeting with his provincial counterparts. Let me read to you from the Canadian Press story at the time. We're most likely going to be going quite quickly in relative terms because we're not starting from nowhere, Duclos said after meeting with his provincial counterparts in Edmonton. A one-for-all model is not possible in Canada. That would be unfair to the efforts that various provinces have made in the past, Duclos said. That's still all about setting up a national childcare program. It might look different in different parts of the country, but the federal government will be paying for it. Let me ask you, is that infrastructure or is that ongoing social program spending? See, the reason I ask is you build a bridge, the bridge is going to stay there. You build a road, the road's going to stay there. Sure, there's maintenance costs, but the road doesn't cost the same every year. If you set up a national childcare program that costs $5 billion, next year it's still going to cost you $5 billion. In fact, it might cost you $5.25 or $5.5 billion. The next year, $6 billion. The costs will go up. This is how social programs work, and that is what the Liberals are planning to do under the guise of infrastructure. There's a lot of problems with Bill Morneau's, his shady numbers that he put out when he was in Vanier on Monday, but this is the biggest problem of them all. Trying to tell Canadians that they're going to invest in the economy, that they're going to do infrastructure, when really they're talking about new social programs, new social spending, permanent social programs, permanent spending. That's how you end up with a structural deficit. That's a nice fancy term that means we're going to be stuck in deficit for a long time, or we'll have to cut somewhere or raise taxes. Raising taxes can be damaging to the economy. It's not going to stop the Liberals from doing it. They're promising a new tax on stock options. They've already raised taxes on the wealthiest Canadians, and they're promising a carbon tax. All of these things are going to be detrimental to the economy. We are in for quite the shock over the next few years, because this Liberal government is not the Liberal government of Jean Chrétien and Paul Martin. Paul Martin cut government spending. He did it because Jean Chrétien told him to, and Chrétien did it because, Wall Street was ready to write Canada off as a third world banana republic. That's how bad our debt situation was. Justin Trudeau is inheriting an economy that isn't in that bad a shape. Unemployment nationally is quite good. Even regionally, it's not bad. Absolutely, unemployment has doubled in Alberta, but it's still well below the 10, 12, 13% that we were seeing during the economic downturn of 2008, 2009. We don't need this huge spending. There's no clamor for a national daycare program or a national pharmacare program or all of the other things that the Liberals are talking about. But in their view, that's what infrastructure is. Another point to prove that when they say infrastructure, they don't just mean that they're talking about roads and bridges and transit lines and things like that. Heritage Minister Mélanie Joly announced that going forward, infrastructure projects in Canada will have to include public art. So no longer is an infrastructure project about simply building that road and bridge I've been talking about. It also includes daycare centers. It includes senior centers. It includes whatever green project that Gerald Butts dreams up. And now it also includes a mural. So great, what are we going to have? Maybe Ottawa will get or your local city will get a bike path with a mural on it, and that will be deemed infrastructure. It's not going to boost the economy. It's not going to get people back to work in any significant way, but it will reward the people that the Liberals really want to look after. Their friends, the special interests that put them back in power. And it will lead to more government spending. At the end of the day, that's what Liberals are really all about anyway, isn't it?
Want to have dinner with Faith Goldie? Grab a drink with Brian Lilley? Talk politics with Ezra? You can do it all on the Rebel Cruise this November. Join us for great debates, gourmet meals, and gorgeous scenery as we sail from Fort Lauderdale around beautiful Caribbean islands. It's an intimate week where you can really get to know your favorite Rebel personalities and meet other Rebel lovers too. Space is limited, so visit therebelcruise.ca to sign up now.
I love Alberta. I've lived here my whole life and I'm proud of it. I'm proud of our free market, pro-business, low-tax, do-it-yourself attitude. And now, I'm watching my province get destroyed. We've all had hints of the NDP's radical views in the past, but no one actually thought they'd ever run this province. Not even them. And now they are. And the worst is yet to come. I give my sad forecast for Alberta in my new ebook, The Destroyers, Rachel Notley and the NDP's War on Alberta.
Well, I just happen to look at the budget by a layman's point of view. I'm no expert. I just can kind of add. But Ian Lee is a professor of economics at the Sprott School of Business, Carleton University here in Ottawa. He joins me via Skype now to talk about the Liberal budget. And Dr. Lee, let me ask you, are you concerned about the jump from a first 9 months of 2015-2016 fiscal year from a $3.2 billion surplus to $18.4 billion plus next year?
I am, but probably for different reasons than others. I am not one of those people that believe this is going to blow up the government of Canada. The former Prime Minister, I'm referring to the Harper government, bequeathed or passed on a very, very substantial legacy, a positive legacy to the incoming Liberal government. That is to say, the economic fundamentals of Canada are such that this is one of the strongest economies in the world, notwithstanding the oil shock. When we look underneath the hood and look at the fundamentals, is the car rusting? Has the motor been tuned up? Has it been well prepared, well maintained? The horsepower, the engine is very, very strong in Canada. We have one of the lowest debt to GDPs because of the prudence of the Harper Conservative government. So I'm not concerned about that. What I'm concerned about is, and I have no problem when it is warranted. I have a new piece that came out today from Macdonald-Laurier Institute on fiscal policy and deficits with Sean Spears. And we've argued there's no problem with deficits and stimulus spending when they're used appropriately in only certain occasions. When there are very bad times, the Depression, 1980-81, when interest rates went to 20%, unemployment went through the roof. 1992-94, and again, of course, 2008-2009, when banks in Europe and the United States were going down like 10 pins in a bowling alley.
We're not having that happen right now, though.
We are not having that happen. So my first point is, to use that great line from Supertramp, crisis, what crisis? There is no justification for rolling out massive stimulus and deficit when the economy is growing at 1.4% real meaning after inflation has been removed. Next year forecast to go to 2.2 by the minister himself, Finance Minister Morneau, and we are outperforming the Germans and the French, two economic powerhouses in Europe. So it's very difficult to argue that we are in the crisis of 2008-9 simply because we are not. And so I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't be doing some targeted fiscal policy stuff for Alberta. Things like extending EI temporarily for the people who are suffering so much out there because of this regional crisis caused by this oil shock. But I think they're getting mixed up in Ottawa in the finance ministry, and I mean the politicians who are making the decisions, because they're treating this as if it's a general economic recession.
It is not. But Finance Minister Bill Morneau, while he won't admit that he inherited a surplus and still was talking about the deficit yesterday, when he appeared before the Finance Committee, he said, if we don't do this, or if we did what the other parties promised to do in the election, it could put us into a recession. So he's admitting they're not in a recession, but they're still doing this big spending boost.
I agree. I saw that quote last night, and the moment I saw it, I thought, oh my God, you're a rookie. You're very inexperienced, and you will, I predict he will regret. First off, Bill Morneau's a smart man. He's a good guy, but I think he made a serious mistake when he said that. Because I was sitting there watching with my wife, he said, what Bill Morneau has said, if you balance the books, you cause the economy to go into a recession. Now, I've never heard this before. And in fact, there's countries around the world, starting with a country called Germany, that is a powerhouse, that does not run deficits, and is one of the strongest economies in the world. Now, I don't think he meant to say that. I think he got flummoxed and panicked a little bit under the situation. And I think what he was trying to say is, I want to take precautions just in case. Brian, I still do not believe, and this has nothing to do with partisan politics. I've looked at the GDP growth numbers coming out of IMF, whom I trust, out of the OECD, that I trust, the private sector average of forecasts, whom I trust. Nobody is predicting a recession, not one single soul. And so are we going to, just because, gee whiz, the numbers aren't growing as fast as we would like, we're going to go and draw down and go 30 billion into the ditch every time the numbers go down a little bit because we don't like it. That's not the way to run a government.
And thank you for saying 30 billion, because my prediction is between 25 and 30. And I thought when I first said that, I thought I was, going on the outside, and I've since found out that others are saying we could be facing a $35 billion deficit next year once all the other spending and other factors kick in.
And Brian, let me throw one more point out.
Okay, because I want to get to why I think that they will let the car rust.
Because the people on the left, I'm talking CCP and so forth, will say, look, what's your big deal? Why are you being so religious about this? So what, 35 billion. I want to explain the answer to the so what. Why is everyone so excited? If you go and use up this some of this capacity right now when there's no need, what are you going to do on the rainy day when the recession does come? Well, yes, of course we can go deeper in the ditch. But think of all this money that we just spent for no recession. And think of it as squandered money. We squandered it when there was no need to squander it. You should keep your money for a rainy day, because one day the roof will leak and then you need to fix the roof. And right now what he's doing is squandering the money when there is no leaking roof and there is no crisis, there is no problem, when he could be much more surgical and precise in addressing the problems in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Newfoundland without dragging the whole country down 30 billion plus into the ditch, by the way, for the next 4 years. So we're talking adding $250 billion onto the national debt.
Okay, so you said that the fundamentals are sound and this won't, blow up the economy. I do think that given some of what they're talking about when they refer to infrastructure as not traditional infrastructure, I do think that we could end up moving towards a structural deficit that goes well beyond 4 years. Because if you remember the Liberal infrastructure plan, they said, 1/3 would be regular infrastructure, what we all think of, roads, bridges, so on. 1/3 would be social infrastructure and 1/3 green infrastructure. We still don't know what green infrastructure is, but we do know that when it comes to social infrastructure, they're talking things like a national daycare program. Jean-Yves Duclos, the minister in charge of that file, saying he's very close to an agreement with the provinces to start funding daycare across the country. Well, that's a social program spending. That's not infrastructure, and that won't go away. You don't just say, okay, we're going to set this up and that'll boost the economy and then we stop spending when the private sector kicks in. That's permanent spending we won't get rid of. So that means permanently adding on.
That's right. It's a consumable. I have been critical of even during the Liberal campaign before they were elected, I said that this was a very, very serious mistake that they were making. And I'm referring to the fact that the Liberals decided, because infrastructure is sexy, it's seen as a good thing by everybody. So what they did is they decided to rebrand, relabel, redefine some things they wanted to do, social spending and green spending. They decided to relabel it as infrastructure. So then when somebody said, why are you spending this money? They say, oh, infrastructure. And everybody goes, oh, yes, infrastructure. I can't criticize it. And this is deceitful. The government is misleading the Canadian people. Infrastructure has a well-defined and well-understood meaning in the literature, the public policy literature and the economics literature, going back at least a century, if not 3 centuries, to Adam Smith. This isn't Ian Lee being some kind of a pedant about words. Infrastructure is, I'll put it very simply for everybody, it's spending on things that allow goods or services or people to move more quickly and efficiently across the economy. So that's bridges, it's roads, it's ports, it's railroads, it's pipelines, it's St. Lawrence Seaway. It is not daycare centers. It is not hockey arenas. Okay. I'm not suggesting those shouldn't be spent. That's great, but it's not infrastructure. It will not speed up the productivity of the economy. This is just political demagoguery, redefining something that they want to do and using the word infrastructure because they know it's very politically fashionable, but it is not infrastructure. They are playing games with the language.
Okay, so could all this new social spending that has been rebranded, you add that on and you add in all the other spending they're doing, does that lead us towards or the possibility, if not outright structural deficit, the possibility of one, because I think back to another Trudeau that was prime minister that promised short-term small deficits, and they lasted from about 1970 to 1996, was it?
95 to 98 was the largest downsizing in Canadian history when the Minister of Finance and the Deputy Minister of Finance announced a layoff of 70,000 public servants in the federal public service.
Yeah. So will this new spending plan by the current government, does it lead to the possibility of structural deficit, which is much harder to get out of than short-term stimulus spending deficits?
I believe it does, because what they're doing is adding the social spending, which is what it is. I call it a consumable. And I mean by a consumable, unlike a bridge, you build the bridge and it's there for another 50, 70, 80 years, whatever. Okay, you don't rebuild the bridge every year. Social spending on daycare, you spend year after year as long as there's babies. And as far as I know, there's always been babies in Canada, and there always will be babies in Canada, which means there's always going to be a demand for daycare. Again, maybe this is legitimate, but it's not social. It's not infrastructure spending. And so what they're doing is they're increasing the base of spending. And yes, I do think it's going to lead inexorably, along with all the other spending. I'm not blaming it on the one. Yeah. It's going to lead to a structural deficit. I actually think, and I've said this before publicly, I think that they do have a plan in 4 years to increase taxes, to announce some serious tax increases to address the, by then, structural deficit. And I still think that GST increase is still on the table. He ruled it out the other day, but if you listen to his words very carefully, he didn't say I rule it out forever. He said, I'm not doing it right now. Yeah. And so I think that down the road, I know a lot of people say he's going to make gazillions from marijuana, yet to be determined. The record in Colorado was they are yielding a lot smaller revenues than they thought, whereas GST is a gusher. Every 1 percentage point yields about $12 billion a year. And I still think that they were very critical of it in opposition, reducing the GST rate. So I think it's on the cards that by the time they have an entrenched deficit, that they will come back in 3 or 4 years' time and say, look, people, you want all these goodies, you have voted for us, and we have a deficit, so we need more revenue, and so we're going to put forward a proposal to increase the GST, which, of course, is one of the legacies of the Harper government. And this government has it seems, a very strong passion to try to eradicate every element of Harper's legacy.
Well, a GST hike on top of a hike on income taxes and the top, earners. Carbon tax coming up, stock option tax coming up. All of these things add up, and eventually you start overtaxing people, and that's not good for Canadians. It's also not good for the federal treasury, because there is a decline in return eventually.
What I'm worried about, Brian, I really am worried about this. I'm not worried about, quite frankly, about stock options. I mean, I'm sure those people that have them are worried, but we're talking a very small percentage of the population.
I'm worried about them because of tech startups, and we have plenty of them here in Ottawa, and it's used to attract top talent. It's not all corporate robber baron CEOs.
I'm not trying to trivialize it, but generally people in startups, they have no taxes anyways because they're not making any money at the beginning years. I'm much more worried. The carbon tax is going to hit every last human being in the country. It's going to be, as people still don't understand this, it is going to have the same, if you love the GST, you're going to love carbon taxes. It's going to stretch into every nick and cranny of the economy, just like the GST. It's a completely all-pervasive tax. It doesn't just go like some people think, oh, well, on this item and that item. It goes on all fossil fuels throughout the economy at every stage of the economy. Well, agriculture uses fossil fuels to run the tractors, and then you need the trucks to ship the food to the factories, and so on and so forth. So it's going to permeate and work its way through the food system, through the grocery system, through the clothing system, through the restaurant system, through everything. And it's going to, at the end of the day, you're going to have less money in your pocket. And so the carbon taxes are going to reduce your discretionary spending, which is going to slow down the economy.
No, I wish people would understand that. Ian, thanks for taking the time to speak with us today, and always insightful. Dr. Ian Lee, Professor of Economics at the Sprott School of Business at Carleton University. Drop us a line. Let us know what you think the future for Canada's economy holds. Brian at therebel.media. Stick around. Not done yet. More to come on the Ezra Levant Show.
So open-minded that the brains have fallen out.
What's the point that you're making?
The point that I'm making is that if you're going to propose a massive overhaul to the way the economy is developed in terms of carbon tax, cap and trade, other forms like that, it helps to have some science that is in fact settled.
We've heard you loud and clear. You can't get enough Canadian Conservative news and opinion. Why not check out our blog? It's all your favorite Conservative bloggers together on a page called The Megaphone. Go to therebel.media/themegaphone or click on the Megaphone menu from our main page to check it out.
Well, thanks for watching tonight's program, and I've been having a blast filling in for Ezra Levant all week on the appropriately named Ezra Levant Show. We'll be here until Friday. Ezra will be back next week. Lots of reaction to the show. It's so great to hear from so many of you. Well, Bravo Zulo had this to say about Tuesday night's program. Canadians deserve this disaster. That is the only way they will wake up to their spoiled and entitled to their entitlements foolish ways. Unfortunately, we will all have to pay for it. I have to say, I fear that you're right on that. We voted for this. We knew what was coming, at least if you were paying attention. Maybe there were a lot of what Rush Limbaugh calls low information voters out there. Mike Williams writes in to say, I'd like to hear our finance minister admit that developed countries' economic growth has been slow for the past 10 years. It's called the new normal, and Canada's performance has been near the top. But that would undermine the blame it on Harper propaganda. Well, you're right there. We know that Canada has been near the top economically for a long time. Everybody's slowing down, especially Europe. Might have something to do with a little thing called demographics, but never mind. Sunny Ways will fix that. And someone named Stopwatch, I'm sure that's their given name, they write in to say, you're doing a great job, Brian. I suppose with the media party fawning over their pop star PM, we will never find out exactly what this Liberal government will end up costing taxpayers. One thing we can know for sure is whatever debt they are willing to admit to now will be far less than the actual number in the end. Well, I also fear you're right on that. We're catching them hiding expenses everywhere. Why is the Industry Department or Revenue Canada paying for the refugee rush? Why is the military paying for Korans and prayer mats? None of it makes sense, but it is about hiding the facts, like the surplus they inherited from the Conservatives. But that's a story perhaps for another day. Thanks for watching. As you want to drop his line on tonight's show, Brian at therebel.media. You can tweet at me, at Brian Lilley. That's my Twitter handle. And on Facebook, make sure you click the thumbs up, the like button. It's facebook.com/Brian Lilley. That wraps the show for tonight. Thanks for watching. And remember, I'm on your side.